I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. There's a concept in Neil Gaiman's classic novel, American Gods, that I believe is very true. At one point, the two main characters, Shadow Moon and Mr. Wednesday, are driving across America to find sacred places. Mr. Wednesday calls them places of power. Now, Shadow assumes they're going to find an ancient church or a burial ground, but Mr. Wednesday says no. In other countries, people recognize places of power, places of transcendence, where something important or special happens. And when they recognize the place of power, they might erect mosques or stone circles. But in America, the true places of power are not recognized by priests or prophets, but by ordinary people. These folks get called to this powerful place, and they feel themselves being drawn into this transcendent void. And they respond to it by building a city with hubcaps and beer bottles, or they build dioramas of fairy tales in limestone caverns. Yes, that's right. We're talking roadside attractions. People feel themselves drawn to these crazy sacred places. And this is where we share our empathy and our joy for life and our childlike curiosity. And what is a more American sacred place than the drive-in? We share our passion for the automobile there, and our passion for movies, and the passion for the very land under our feet. We camp out there. And perhaps the most sacred ritual of the drive-in is the Dusk-To-Dawn Show. In a Dusk-To-Dawn, we camp out in the collective backyard with some 100 strangers we call friends for the night. And we sit and we watch spooky stories until the sun comes up on a really big campfire. For the rest of the summer, the running theme on Hellbent for Horror is passion. I'm going to be celebrating that thing that makes fandom fun. And today we're going to speak to two folks who answered the call from a sacred place. And this sacred place is known as the historic Skyline Drive-in that's nestled in Shelbyville, Indiana. Now, for the last 9 years, Joey Gaudin and Matt Masters have been programming the Super Monster Movie Fest. It's a 2-night Dusk-To-Dawn show, and each of these events has a distinct theme. The next Super Monster Movie Fest is August 27th and 28th, and the theme is The Devil Made Us Do It. It's 10 movies about the devil, demons, and demonic possession over 2 nights, and I'm going to be there to join in on the fun. Joe Gaudin, Matt Masters, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
It's great to see you guys. So one of the things that I do on my show is I tend to ask people what their first kiss with horror was. It's the movie that sent you down this road to ruin, turned you from just a casual observer into someone who's going to be a fan for life. So Joe, let's start with you. What was your first kiss with horror?
Well, so for my movie watching, I guess I could be considered a child of the 80s. Okay, because that's when I really kind of got into it. I was old enough, I suppose. But prior to answer your question, prior to that, so I remember watching a local horror host, Sammy Terry.
Yes.
When I was very young. But I would normally fall asleep because it was on very late, so I would never get through a movie. So, but my first official movie that turned me into kind of a junkie for horror was seeing the Evil Dead on VHS.
Nice.
From our local video store.
Yeah. That will change you. That's one of those movies that definitely is a separation between, like, what I always talk about is like my parents, my dad gave me what I would consider court appointed horror. In other words, it was them and The Thing and stuff that he could watch with me that he knew wouldn't keep me up at night. Then there was the illicit stuff like the Evil Dead.
Right.
You find for yourself. And so, Matt, how about your first kiss with horror?
I still remember it clearly. It was in August of 1979. And I remember it because I'm from the Chicagoland area. So for me, it was Svengoolie. Mm-hmm. And he had just, came to the airwaves, the son of Svengoolie, Rich Coase, right, taking over for the earlier Screaming Yellow Theater. So in the summer of 79, he had returned to the airwaves. And I remember my parents that summer they were going out on a date or something. It was a Saturday night. And I remember, flipping through the channels. We had a small black and white television in our little kitchen. We had a townhouse. And I remember it being around time when it would come on and flipping through the channels, they were just leaving. And it's a small little black and white. And there it was, and that eerie sort of really cool theme song he used to use back then, which was Link Wray's Rumble.
Yeah.
And he'd play that, demonic instrumental with, screams in the background. I thought, my gosh, what's this? And that real cheesy, late 70s sort of graphics. And I remember the movie was Attack of the Giant Leeches. And I was just, enthralled at that point, just being, 9 years old, I think it was. And thinking, this is amazing. What is this show? What is these movies? Who is this guy? And that, and I had experienced horror prior to that, but that was really the moment, the more of the aha, I really, really like this. And that was really it. Now that was kind of the lighter fare of stuff, certainly a B movie, if not maybe a C movie at that. But that's what kind of really turned it on for me.
I love that both you bring up the horror host because the horror host is like this portal. He's the ferryman on the river Styx. It's going to take you over to this crazy place. And they matter so much. And you're easily scared and you kind of need those guides. My fellow, out here in the Bay Area, it was Bob Wilkins, who did Creature Features, and he was known for being an average guy smoking a cigar, sitting on a yellow rocking chair, and he would just open the TV guide and say, here's what you could be watching instead of this terrible thing that we got. And so he had a certain way of doing it, but I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, and my guy was Uncle Ted's Ghoul School. And he was this bad magician with a fez. And they would actually cut away when he would do sleight of hand to like a rubber rat or something, because he was so bad that he needed to have that thing. And, boy, he was so corny. And yet you remember him fondly, or I remember him fondly. And the movie that he showed that scared me to death was The Brain That Wouldn't Die. And, you look at it now and it's like the fodder for Mystery Science 3000. But when I saw it, I saw, one of the most horrible things in the world. The guy gets his arm pulled off. He's got no fingers on his other hand. He's trying to open the doorknob. It sounds like a joke now, but at that point it was like, oh my God, he's bleeding to death. This is a nightmare. I just love that it's that thing. And you're kind of the horror hosts now, because you have people who come to see you. They go through that portal when they pay that ticket. And you got this really big campfire in front of everybody that's like 70 feet, and they get to have their moment. So I was talking about passion before, and, the things we do for love is what I think that I like to call this, because I talked about in my show for my 100th that I used to be a headhunter in Silicon Valley. That's how I made my dime. And so I spoke for other people's passion all the time. They couldn't. They were inarticulate about it, and they paid me well to ignore my own passion and spend all my time talking about theirs. And I went about a decade before it burnt me out. So I left there and started to follow my passion, talking about horror movies. And what I learned is following your passion makes you sound absolutely fucking insane. And it's also like this weird cut point, right? So, it's like an epic quest. I need to leave one life scared to death going into the woods in order to start another one. So before you entered the glamorous world of drive-ins and being a drive-in owner and operator, what were your previous lives? So Joe, I kind of know yours, but Matt, I'm really interested in hearing first what you've got.
In other words, what I do for a living prior to this is the same thing I still do today. Believe it or not, I'm an engineer in telecom.
Nice.
For one of the large carriers. And I've been at this gig for, 26 years now, I think. And that's been and that's just with this company. Prior to that, I was with other telecom companies. So I actually started back in 1989, I think it was, right at the very, very cusp of wireless telecommunications, and have been basically doing that ever since.
That's cool. I'm interested because that means you're more on the tech side. And what I always thought was interesting about movies, and I think maybe the drive-in more than anything else, is that it's an art form that relies on both art and science, and it relies on every form of art. You need to have painting, you need to have drama, acting, you need costuming, all of that stuff, including the science of dealing with the light. So were you kind of interested in the movies in almost like a tech thing, like, hey, how does a camera work? Or were you always just, it's the moving image and I just like to escape?
No, because I think much like Joe, we're also musicians. And so there's this sort of scientific side, and then there's this romantic side, right? That plays music or writes poetry or whatever it is. And so I battle with both sides of that, and always have. But for me, it was really probably perhaps not so much the scientific, but perhaps more of the, I guess, romanticism of these older movies. You'll find that, Joe tends to like the films, from the 70s, 80s onwards. And I'm back in the 30s and the 40s. And so that's kind of probably why it ends up being a lot of times a perfect mix. We meet somewhere in the 60s, I think, is where we meet up. But just this Gothic kind of stuff, that came around in the 30s and 40s in particular, really sort of turned me on in this more of a romanticism, romantic Gothic horror is what really got me, more so than even the science in that.
Oh, that's great. Especially the idea that both of you kind of meet at a certain point. There's two old school conventions that are still going. One is Cinema Wasteland in Cleveland that I go to, and one that I still have to go to in Pennsylvania called Monster Bash. And what I was told about Monster Bash is, well, basically they're more black and white universal horror, and then you got the really crazy drive-in exploitation that's in Cinema Wasteland. He goes, so as soon as they put color to the blood, that's when Monster Bash stops, and that's where Cinema Wasteland begins. So there is something to that. So Joe, tell us a little bit about what you. I have a feeling you didn't necessarily quit a job to start the circus. You just moonlight with a couple different circuses.
Yeah, that's not too far off. Well, I guess I would say apart from starting out doing variety of quite horrible jobs. I was into music. I was, a musician, and I opened a recording studio, and for quite a few years, that's what I did. And then of course the technology changed, and now everybody can record their album in their basement. So, I tend to almost completely close chapters before I open the next one. So I always look at it as, I did music, and then I decided I don't want to do that anymore. And then I thought I want to make movies. So I started making movies. And then the drive-in came along, and I knew nothing about it. I had never touched a 35 millimeter projector ever. And somehow I ended up with this drive-in. It was a passion thing, I guess. It was, hey, this could be cool, and here we are, a decade later, more than a decade now. And so, yeah, I tend to, I guess I'm kind of a free spirit in a way. I don't necessarily, oddly, everything I've done kind of links together. But yet they're completely different, going from, engineering in a recording studio environment, to playing a film at a drive-in is pretty far apart, but yet they're both, creating, an experience. Right. So, and the same with making movies. It's about creating something and presenting it to the public.
Building different worlds. You kind of build a different world in everything that you've been doing. I'm laughing because I love, you have Night of the Living Dead and you've got Texas Chainsaw Massacre framed up on the wall, but also Monster Dog sitting in a corner.
That's my newest. It's not even on the wall yet.
I saw it and I'm like going, all right. So it's not just the regular classics.
Right. When Alice Cooper, that's signed by Alice Cooper.
Oh, wow.
And when he signed it, he told me he had never signed a Monster Dog one sheet before. And I thought, you know what? I really believe him.
Exactly. I know. That's one of those movies that, it's just, I love that he sings in it, right? That's how they got him to do it.
Sure, yeah.
Put a little bit of movie music in here. Yeah, come on. We'll let you be in the movie.
The only thing that the thing that was really funny is he said that when they shot the film, mostly they had several English actors. Okay. But yet when they put the film out, they redubbed every actor's voice. So none of those voices are their real voices.
That's awesome. That sounds about right too, for that style of film. So you talked about passion. You ended up here at the drive-in for over a decade now. Did you have a big connection with drive-ins when you were kids?
I mean, I wouldn't say a big connection. I mean, we went to them, but, my parents would take me to a drive-in occasionally, but I didn't really, it's odd. I didn't have a connection with, even as a teenager, when I was old enough to drive and go to a drive-in myself, I rarely did. But I think part of it was because, sadly, the drive-ins at that point in my area were pretty lousy.
Yeah.
They weren't what this is now, so I didn't really care to see a lot of those movies. I do remember seeing Rambo First Blood Part 2 at a drive-in. And of course, I do remember in 70, whatever it was, seeing Star Wars at a drive-in on a double bill with Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, because they're perfect matches.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I was more about the movies than I was about where I got to see them, because, I got into it when video stores were the rage,
right?
And you could go, for a couple bucks, go, stock up on some movies and spend the weekend watching movies. I think if there had been something like the Skyline, for instance, and what we do now, I would have been there, but there wasn't. There wasn't then.
Yeah, I know. For me, I'm slightly older because VHS was absolutely brand new. In fact, it was really beta, and so it was like $1,000 to get a VCR at one point. Right. My dad was like saving dollars, like silver dollars, and he said, "I'll buy one of those when we get to 1,000." And so we would rent it. Friends of mine, we would rent it from like a Sears Rent-A-Center, and you'd have to put your driver's license and so much. And there were only like 3 movies that you could rent.
Right.
Everybody saw The Wild Bunch because that was available. So I had the drive-in a little bit more in my life, especially because my parents were didn't have a lot of money. So you would go to the Dusk-To-Dawns and stuff. You have this special thing. But I remember seeing Star Wars where they would always have promotions. Like Herbie and the Love Bug was one that I remember going to, and they had the Volkswagen there on the lot, and it was like a big deal for me to see. And some teenage kids like hurdling posters, rolled up posters and windows as you're driving by. And then there was the Star Wars. They knew that they were going to have a huge line. I'd never seen a line like that at a drive-in, just going forever. So they put people in costume in Pennsylvania in August. In like Darth Vader's like melting. He's just like ready to have heat stroke, waiting to get over to the place. But, the drive-in had a certain appeal for me. I kind of fell in love with it, but it was because I kind of loved the magic that was going on, loved the movies. But there was something about like in a theater, you've got the movie projector way up above everybody. But when you're walking to like the bathroom's attached to the projector, basically. Right. You're walking by and there's this big blast of light and you can hear people talking and you can hear the motor and everything. I always felt like I was learning some kind of secret when I was going to the drive-in.
Right.
So for me, it had a certain love. How about you, Matt? Did you go to drive-ins a lot, or were you more of a theater person?
It mimics really Joe's story the same way. In the 70s, it was going under the power of your parents' buck. Yeah. So you went on occasion, and I remember having the feelings of absolute freedom that you didn't have in the indoor theaters. Especially as a child, you were more aware of it because you were allowed to roam, go play at the playground, play with your friends, make noise. Your parents weren't slapping you upside the head to be quiet. You weren't choking on smoke, right? Because remember, in the indoor theaters, you could smoke in those days. Mm-hmm. And so there was this certain sort of joy, and then the oversized screen, and your parents would just let you, sit right under it and watch it. And but we'd only go on occasion, and then by the time you could drive on your own and do what you wanted, excuse me, they were dying, they were declining. And the experiences there weren't the same. So at that point, you have your own freedom as a teen, and you want to go there. And what you remember just a mere 10 years earlier wasn't really quite the same. And so I think that always stuck with me, the thought of that, and sort of the joy of being in the drive-in. And it started to wear on me, the experience in the chain theaters and the multiplexes. Over time, at first it was kind of a new thing. It was interesting. You could see these movies, and that's what you wanted to do and rent. But the theater experience started to become very tiresome, boring, just not the experience that it really should be. And about the time we started to see this resurgence in drive-in theaters, and folks like myself and Joe realized we could sort of bring those experiences back to life, that experience. I mean, that's really what it ends up being, and this sense of freedom that you just can't get in an indoor theater. And when I think we realized we could do that and sort of bring that piece of Americana back, it really, brought a lot of memories and experiences back for me, and ones that I kind of wished I had had once I had the freedom of being a teen and being able to have my own bucks and drive around and do all those things. But I missed it, I think. And I think Joe and I both missed it maybe about 10 years, had we been about 10 years older, we would have been, driving our dates to the drive-in in the 70s. And so I think we just missed that door, But a similar experience to Joe's.
I was just going to add there, Matt kind of circled back on something, I said the Evil Dead is the one that really hooked me. If there'd been a drive-in around showing the Evil Dead, I would have been there.
Oh yeah.
And I think that was the key for me. I wasn't a shut-in that just watched, video rentals.
Right.
I would go see mainstream movies at drive-ins, but for me, the drive-in, in the 80s, especially the last half of the 80s and the 90s, the drive-in started to become first run theaters.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't all that interested in a lot of those movies, which is probably why I didn't go. But I always thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if I could see, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead at a drive-in? But nobody was doing that. And now I think we're in the middle of a little bit of a renaissance, but also a reinvention. And I like to think that the Skyline may potentially have led the way on some of it, because of my ignorance on how to run a drive-in, has led me to being able to just nonchalantly do very crazy shit.
Well, I think that's an interesting point that I want to get to as well, which is, first off, the difference between the cinema and the drive-in to me is the difference between a church service and a tent revival. You get to have this really explosive, it's the essence of why you went to the movies in the first place. And it's a shame that we kind of lose, as Matt had said, I don't think the multiplexes were supposed to be made 20 theaters showing 2 movies, 10 theaters of the same movie playing in both places. But you talked about reinvention. And I think that that's what's interesting to me. We talked about horror hosts before, and, horror hosts filled a niche that was necessary at the time that was purely unique for the time. You didn't have television 24/7. You had affiliates that needed to fill space. You had movie theaters or movie companies that were losing money and had these old films that weren't making any money in their safes. And so there was a need in one place, a need in another, and people just kind of put it together. Same happened with punk rock. Everything is dead down in Manhattan in the 70s. And then there's all these artists who are like, hey, can we play here? And it's like, yeah, come on in. And you start something new. You reinvent out of almost like found stuff. Which is really kind of the folk thing that you have with roadside attractions. So in terms of our culture, what do you think the drive-in represents? I heard a couple things about freedom and stuff, but as a cultural thing, you're reinventing it. What do you think that it means? What do you think it brings to people?
I personally think that I always use the word communal. It's the experience of seeing something outside under the stars on this, gigantic screen, with, 300 strangers or what have you, is a completely different experience than sitting inside a box with recirculated air for 2 hours or what have you. But the other thing that a lot of people maybe don't think about, because obviously it's outside, it's this. Those are pretty obvious things. Is that the drive-in has represented, I don't want to say in every decade, but maybe close to that, something different. When drive-ins became a thing, they were a place for families.
Yep.
Okay. And then they evolved and it became more of a teenage hangout, right? Or what they used to call the passion pits.
Yeah.
Right. And then Hollywood, in their late to the game wisdom, decided, hey, you know what? These places can make some money. We should let them have brand new movies, So I think for everyone, it's different. For our customers, the patrons that come to the Skyline, the line is a little blurred, but it's pretty defined. Meaning, you have these folks who want to see the new Pixar movie. You have these folks that want to see anything exploitation, horror, cult films, all that. And then you have the people that don't care what you're showing. They just want to be there.
Right.
And that's a sector too, that they're like, hey, we want to come out. We want to have the experience, and we want to have some great food, and sit outside. And what are you playing? Yeah. Okay. That's all right. We'll see that.
Right. The subculture.
Yeah. Those are the, and so I think it means something different to everyone in a way. But I think if we're talking about culture, the drive-in culture, I think it still means exactly what it started out meaning. It's just evolved now because now we show digital, and the aesthetics are a little different. We have to have some of the technology. You can't show film for everything because they're not making it. So you drive-ins have had to evolve or die.
Are you digital
about
projection?
every 20 years?
Right. Right. Are you on digital projector now, or are you a mix of the two?
Well, we're a mix. Go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just saying, he's Go ahead. Yeah, we're a mix.
Yeah,
We
we're a
retained-
mix, and yeah, that's why I think. Well, I think it's part of the reason why we've been, somewhat successful about the type of programming that we're doing, because it is, in fact, some of the people that are into the exploitation and horror type stuff that really like to see, really splicey, scratched up film prints.
Right. We are weird.
We did, we were running a platter system when we bought the place, and which was fine. Took up a lot of space. Mm-hmm. So when we had to go digital, we just made the decision, hey, let's keep the projector, the 35, take the platter out and put the digital in place of the platter. And then when we do want to show 35, we can just simply show it reel to reel style instead of the platter. So we're one of the few drive-ins. As a matter of fact, I can definitively say I think we're the only ones in Indiana that actually still show 35. Now there are other drive-ins out there that do it, in the Midwest. I know there's a couple in Pennsylvania that still do run 35, but I think it's important, and I don't want to get into the politics of how to run a drive-in, but in my belief, it is important that you cater to as many people as possible. So therefore, the idea of we would only show 35 millimeter, meaning we wouldn't show any new movies, is ridiculous. The idea of only showing digital to me is also ridiculous, because I think having that ability to throw on this lost 35 millimeter print of something is, that's gold.
Yeah.
That's gold for the drive-in culture folks.
Yeah, it's kind of like the argument of film versus red camera. It's like, well, right. I think both of them have their use, right? I wouldn't want to get rid of either. There's a feel to both things.
80% of the people that come to our drive-in, they just want to see something that looks good. Right. They don't care. They don't care what you're doing behind the curtain, right? Right. But, we do cater to that other 20% who are like, oh, wow, this is a film print,
Yeah, the people who go to get albums.
Right. And, and I think that, 35 millimeter falls into that category of, with vinyl, in that it'll probably never completely die off. Unlike, the audio cassette tapes and things and beta, right? Those types of things. But, and VHS is still around. Obviously, there's now collector societies and things.
I don't get that at all.
Right. I don't think there's one for beta, though, oddly. But, so I think it's important in, what I always say at the Skyline is we embrace our past, but look toward the future. Mm-hmm. And embracing the past is things like having and being able to run 35, showing people these vintage concession stand ads on the screen every night, giving them a feeling of what things used to be like, just a little bit. But, then you also have to, put in, high-end digital projection in order to stay in business.
Yeah.
So it's a balance.
Yeah, as you said before, you kind of trailblaze because of trying to hold that balance, and you need to make it something new. It's not, penny arcades would still be around if nostalgia was the only thing that kept something going. You really need to have it updated in a way, but still pay homage. So I guess that brings me to being a trailblazer here. So you folks bought the Skyline in 2009, right?
Yes.
What were those first few years like? Were you trailblazing from the beginning, or what was the genus that gets us to where we are now?
Matt. So Matt came in a little bit later, and we can skip that chapter if you want, but the pre Matt chapter. But just let me say that in 2009, what actually happened technically was I went to the owners that had owned the drive-in for many years, since the 60s, and they were going to close the drive-in. They were old. Their kids had no interest. They were just done. Okay. And I said, let me lease it for a year and see if I can do this. And, then we'll see. Well, they had nothing to lose. Mm-hmm. They just, took my money, and there you go, Joe. Here's a drive-in. And so that first, I remember the first night, I had gotten a crash course 2 days earlier from a friend of mine who owns some multiplex theaters. And he taught me in 3 hours on a Wednesday night how to run a platter and a 35 millimeter projector. And I remember on Friday being so nervous. I just knew that the film was something bad was going to happen. And we opened, and no one came. And then you have that moment of, oh, what have I done here? No one came our first night. It was a Friday night. It was a Friday night in late April, and no one came. And so obviously it's gotten a lot better now, but in that moment, I realized that this was going to be a process, I think, of figuring out what to do. Right. Mm-hmm. What was this drive-in now? Because it's not going to be what it used to be. I already knew that. It's not going to be a dumping ground for second run Hollywood films all the time. Right. And so what I decided to do was to not listen to anyone.
I was just going to ask, did you have a lot of experts? You have a lot of experts coming out of the woodwork to tell you how to do it in a mediocre fashion.
Still do.
We still do. And so what's really funny is, and this would still have been the pre-Matt days, is that I started doing a lot of things. I mean, we played the movies that we needed to play, okay, but we started doing things, and at that there was no money. The place generated no money, mm-hmm. And so I found myself doing these. As you were talking about Dusk-Till-Dawn shows, our early Dusk-Till-Dawn shows were just public domain films,
right?
Because we had no money, and we didn't know if anybody was going to come in the first place, So we did as much of this stuff as we could. But our film booker, who is probably now 30 years in the business, told me, he goes, everybody else is asking how you're doing what you're doing. And I said, because we were doing these, hey, we're going to show Dusk Till Dawn. We're going to let you camp. Or we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And I said, there is no science to it. I simply don't know what the hell I'm doing. That's what it is. I stopped trying to convince myself that there was some sort of way to make it successful. If you did this and you did this, and if you played Disney and if you played this, or, you were going to be successful. In a sense that, and remember at that time, being successful meant that I didn't have to pay the bills of the drive-in.
Right.
Right. So that was our beginnings, and Matt came into the picture, as Matt was essentially, I guess, a patron, I guess. I mean, he would come to the Skyline, and there were other drive-ins he would also go to. And Matt came into the picture a couple of years later, but that until 2013, the Skyline was, so I mean, that's what, 4 years. The Skyline was terribly unsuccessful. Now, the funny thing is we were doing a lot of the same things we do now. I think it caught, mm-hmm. Right, and I think also the audience changed a bit too, meaning we tried to desperately hard, on a monthly basis, to capture a horror audience. and they were very elusive. And part of it is there weren't a lot of us, if any, around here at the time doing that stuff. Right? They weren't. I don't think they were used to being catered to.
Right.
In that way, they were used to, if I want to see this movie, I'm going to have to go to a video store, or I'm going to have to order it online or something, because nobody's going to show it on in a theater. And that changed. And that's what has changed.
I think it's really interesting that you say that about the horror, because we're always like, we're the redheaded stepchildren, the horror fans. So we're used to, it has to be an import, from Berlin. That's how I'm going to see this movie. And yet you're showing things like Satan's Cheerleaders, so we can see like early stuff done by Dean Cundy, his early work. And Evil Speak. Are you doing the unrated Evil Speak?
Yes, we are.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I mean, a film nerd or a horror nerd's going to know that, but we're not used to having that kind of thing being shown to us. So I think you're absolutely right that it took a little bit of time for us for them to find you. But as you probably know now, once we find you, we're barnacles. We don't leave.
Right.
We stick forever as long as you're giving us that back scratch.
Well, it's evolved now to the point, in the last 2 years where I will actually just go to the horror guys and say, what do you want to do? So we're now to the point where we've made our horror fans a part of. I mean, they, in some ways, in some events, they're actually doing the programming. I mean, in a sense, because as a matter of fact, we have a couple of ongoing events. Our Pandemonium Picture Show Wednesdays, which is like the last Wednesdays every month, which is an exploitation type of thing, grindhousey kind of thing. I don't even pick the movies. There are 3 guys that are super fans, and they pick the movies, and I go find the film rights.
Oh, so, I love that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's been key in that, obviously we can't be the horror all the time drive-in, but when we do it big.
Right.
And that makes it even more fun.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Also, what's really interesting is, Matt, that you were a patron. And that's something that I see a pattern of when I talk to people at drive-ins. The volunteer system seems to be how the place gets its real lifeblood. People who come all the time, who talk. That was kind of how I got my first job at a video store after I got out of the military, and I was kind of like brain dead. I did not know how to reacclimate into regular life. And so I didn't talk to a lot of people, and I went into a video store, and it just so happened this video store had famous directors on the wall, and they had Romero and Carpenter involved with that group. And normally that doesn't happen. And so I went and I started talking to the guy, and before you knew it, within a month, I was working there, and I was the quote unquote movie expert people would come over to for stuff like that. So is that kind of how it happened with you? How did you go from going from drive-in to drive-in to really getting involved and compelled to create yourself?
Yeah, it was it was actually, fairly humble beginning, or sort of introduction to the drive-in. In 2006, I had a son, my first, late in life. And also, I'm not much of a sleeper like Joe. We're up all the time. And so it occurred to me then is, I could go out to a drive-in movie with my son, baby, basically, and give the wife a break, and because she's a early to bed person, 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. And she's off to bed. So it started to kind of dawn on me when he got just a couple months old. I thought, well, gosh, I could go to these movies. He's probably going to be up anyway, and something to do. And so there it began in basically in the summer of 2006. I started taking him, just him and I, and we started going to all the drive-ins that were open in Indiana. There's a few less now than there were then. And so we started making these circuits every weekend. And we just constantly did that until the next thing you know, he's 3 or 4 years old, and then 5. And kept coming back to, eventually you kind of find your favorite places and the places you think they're the best and what have you. And I kept circling back around to the Skyline thinking, this place has got something there, met Joe and we spoke a lot, and I thought, gosh, this place is ripe for a lot of ideas, a lot of growth, and really had the potential some of the others did not, right? And eventually his son got old enough where, he wasn't a baby anymore. And I don't remember much because it was a fairly organic transition. I think just Joe and I started talking, and I think we saw kindred spirits, but in different ways. We're not the same, but in some ways we are, but in a strange way that we don't fully overlap in a lot of ways. In the way that, we see movies and all these things, it's sort of a nice put together, I guess. But we also understood, I think, clearly, you can be a fan, you can be a cinephile, and you can love horror movies and drive-in and all that too. But we also realized clearly there was a business aspect that needed to be addressed and taken care of too, because sometimes you can get lost in the fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes we see owners that take things to the full business extent. That's it. It's just a business. It just shows movies and you go home. And that bugged us. And then there's the ones that, gosh, you love the thought. You love the romantic notion. I go back to that word and the passion. But we're thinking, you're a little foolish on the way you're running the business. You want it to sustain, grow. You want it to be something for a lifetime. So we knew things like, as key as it really is, we knew the movies and what we were doing. We knew we had the tastes covered. We knew we had the resources. We knew that part of it, right? We knew what to show, and we knew what to do to put on a show. But what we really knew we needed to do was also look at things like, food. It's a crucial part of the drive-in business, right? So we knew that was going to be a big part of it, and we need to understand that really, really well to be profitable too, right? To continue this joy of the movies and the experience. So we saw those things, and we saw the aspects of the technology part of it too. When we went to digital, neither one of us had a care in the world. It wasn't a new or bizarre technology. A lot of the drive-in owners at the time of digitization, if you will, that was a huge transition for them. That was something I don't think they were really readily able to accept easily. For us, it was nothing. We literally, I think, my memory serves me correct, pretty sure that, I pushed aside the Christie people and said, we'll do this ourselves. Joe, we can do all of these things ourselves. We saved, I think, thousands and thousands of dollars because of our understanding of the technology and our ability to do it ourselves. So these types of things came together for Joe and I, and we just became partners. And we don't step over each other's toes. And I think Joe operates best having a certain degree of freedom. And I'm a little more burdened than Joe is, so he's there all the time. Hell, he lives right next door. I don't know if you knew that. So not me, and I had kids late in life and the career and, the corporate thing and all of that. And so it just kind of worked harmoniously together, and just going there as a patron and thinking, hey, this is a good place. And Joe saying, hey, you want to get involved, and bringing, similar backgrounds and passion for movies, and then the business acumen part of it that we needed to have too. And just all kind of came together at that point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What Matt said there. So it was really what kind of, I think fully brought him in was the idea that well, not an idea, but the when it came down that they were going to stop making 35 and basically you would convert to digital or die from Hollywood.
Right.
That was I think around that time. And, I was sitting there going, at that point, we had just got to the point I felt where we had crossed over to, okay, now we can build something, meaning the audience had increased. Everything seemed to be starting to really fire. And then this bombshell comes in that, we need $65,000 in order to continue playing first run films. Right.
So many places had this issue. It was like,
right. And many of them didn't survive. Yeah. A lot of them did. Of us did. But
we own it now.
Right.
We paid
right.
for it. We did it.
And I think that's what part of kind of what brought maybe drew Matt into was that there was kind of there was a cause that was born that summer of 2013 that, okay, what can we do to raise this money? Because clearly for all drive-ins, almost all drive-ins, I will say, going to a bank and asking them for that kind of money for a projector was not an option.
Right.
In any way. Now, an indoor theater, totally different thing. You're talking about a $65,000 investment for one projector for, in many cases, a business that's open from Memorial Day to Labor Day.
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't look good on paper, no matter who's looking at it,
On weekends.
On weekends. And you're only, yes. And your audience goes away if it rains.
Right.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, here you go. Here's that money for the projector. Yeah. And so we found a way to do it through some creative fundraising within grassroots. We didn't do crowdfunding, which is now, still, it's the rage, I guess, in that area. But no, we went directly to the people who were coming to the drive-in and said, hey, we're going to sell a bunch of stuff. You guys want to buy it? We're going to use the money to buy this projector. And that's how we did it. It was really grassroots. But that's the moment, I think, when I remember us having this quick conversation. He's there to see a movie and I'm in his ear going, well, we're going to have to do this and this and this and this. And I think that was I don't know if it was the genesis of the partnership, but it was right around that same time that was happening. So, but
to bring it full circle, now my son works there. So there you go.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's great.
And my son's already come and gone, so he's old.
Yeah.
So, Matt, you mentioned that an original take on this story is you traveling around with your son to all these different drive-ins, and that's how you kind of got into it. You guys are kind of like in Tornado Alley for other things. You've got like 20 drive-ins in Indiana, which right. I think has to be a record because there used to be like 4,000. Now there's less than 300, I think, and 20 of them.
New York and Pennsylvania, I think, outclass Ohio as well. I think those three are above us in count.
Wow. That surprised me. I would say, well, I'm not sure how big Indiana is compared to Pennsylvania, but yes, there are just a few pockets where I see that as so much. And I know that you're on the Michigan Road, which is a historic road. Do you find that you get a lot of travelers, pilgrims that come to the show because they're on like this strange travel?
We do. Yeah. We get a fair amount of people that say, hey, we were just driving by.
Right.
And we saw a drive-in. We were like, wow, I wonder if they still show movies.
Right. Yeah. I went to see
it does happen.
Yeah, I went to see my old drive-in, and it's a militiaman place now, so it's not quite. It's been taken over, and but the screen's still there, really raggedy and stuff. But you mentioned before you were talking to different people in the business. Is there like a brotherhood or a fraternity amongst the surviving drive-in owners?
Yeah, there is. it's, you know what I mean, kind of in a
I know it's
sense,
a business,
I guess.
right?
I mean,
So
you know each other, right? Everybody does know each other, and generally knows the owner's names. But is it a functional fraternity like you'd think it would be? I would say it is not. We seem to be a little bit on isolated islands, I guess. Yeah, to be honest, I don't think there's like our friends over at this drive-in that we talk to all the time and share ideas with. I think there's I think too, because it is, as you said, it is a business, and we're trying to, I guess in one part of it too, there is a sense that Joe and I kind of felt we can do all this and think of these things ourselves. I mean, we looked around at what everyone else was doing and thought, we can come up with better and original ideas. We don't need to copy anyone, and we're better off being the trailblazers. So we decided, you know what, we're not going to pay attention to what everyone else is doing. We're going to do what we want to do and have them pay attention to us. Now, that may sound cavalier. That may sound egotistical. Wasn't meant to be. We just thought we are far better off serving ourselves as being, the trailblazer in that regard. And honestly, we pay very, very little attention to what other drive-ins are doing. Again, not because we're, so aloof at that. It's just we're so focused on just doing what we think is clever or unique or different. And to be honest, though, we do tend to sense that a lot of them do tend to copy us, which is fine. But we spend a considerable amount of time, hashing through, discussing ideas, coming up with plans and things like that. And now, though, I would say this in the sense of fraternity, we have been, I think almost all of the drive-ins or in our general vicinity have reached out to us over the years on occasion for advice on things. And it's not that we hide any of that or don't. We're more than happy to help and give advice or suggest the things that we do or how we do it. But we often find sometimes they don't particularly get it. And I don't mean from because they can't grasp it. It's just I don't know. I feel like sometimes we're talking to other owners, and they're not really getting the message of what we're saying and what it means and how we look at these issues and problems and things that we do. And sometimes that seems lost on them too. And but like I said, it's always an open line of communication. We've always been willing to help or share in any way possible. But sometimes things get lost in translation. They don't implement the things we suggest well, or just don't want to do it. But yeah.
There is still a National Drive-In Association that does still exist. We're rebels. We're not members. Probably never will be. And the reason is because that organization, and it's not unlike a lot of other organizations that represent groups of businesses. They're more concerned about talking to you about what sort of the point of sale system you're using.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I'm more interested in
metrics.
Yes, exactly. So, and the one thing I will say, and maybe this could be taken poorly, possibly, but is that I always say, when I see another drive-in doing something, I go, "Oh, that's kind of cool," and it's not a competition. There are far too few of us for this to be a competition. Mm-hmm. And what's good for drive-in culture is good for us. So, I always tell people, and as a matter of fact, I make social media posts about this quite frequently. Guys, go find your nearest drive-in and go.
Yeah.
I don't care what drive-in you go to. Now, that being said, I get very irritated. And maybe this is something that's evolving with my age. I get very irritated at poorly run drive-ins.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that it misrepresents the drive-in culture. There are people that are new to drive-ins. Every night we're open, we have someone who says to me, we've never been to a drive-in before. So every time you open up your drive-in to do a show, you are exposing someone new to what you do. And if you do it poorly, that person may, in their mind, go, maybe drive-ins aren't for me.
Right.
They're not going to know necessarily that every drive-in is a little different. And there are good ones, and there are ones that are, as I say, outdoor multiplexes.
Right.
Yeah. We are not that. Right. Yeah. And so I do get irritated about that. I mean, not to get on a rant, but it is very irritating to me because, if you don't care enough to have your drive-in be, let's say, excel in some area, then get out of the business. Because to be quite honest, you're not going to make $1 million in the drive-in business. Ain't going to happen. So what if you don't have the passion and you don't like it enough to nurture it, then why are you there?
Yeah, I have the same issue with podcasting, right? I had the same issue when I was a recruiter. Everybody remembers the bad ones. So you have to kind of reinvent just to be able to be in there. So reinvention, one of the things that I think is interesting, every drive-in has its own special angle, right? And what I've heard about yours is like you could knock me over with a feather, truly unexpected, that it would be the concession stand, that the food at the drive-in is a big draw. So talk to me about that.
Well, yeah, that's a long, and when in 2009, or we'll say 2008, the Skyline served prepackaged nachos, bottled sodas, and popcorn and candy. That's basically it. And so it was really not much different than the multiplex in that at that time. Now, now there are multiplexes where you can get a steak dinner.
Right.
But at that time, it was the food was crap. It was just crap. And I knew, because when I was very young, I thought I wanted to be a chef, and I worked in restaurants, and I'm a foodie, I guess, if you had to label me. I love interesting foods and things like that. And so does Matt.
Except I don't eat. That's the weird part of it. It drives Joe nuts.
Matt's not an eater. He's a taster.
Yeah.
Right. So Matt will come in and he won't get a cup of soda. He will get a souffle cup and have a taste of soda. That's the difference. Right. But yeah. So, the food, in the first 2 years, I realized that if you were going to be showing first run movies, you were 100% at the mercy of Hollywood on every level. And they were going to take a lot of your ticket money, and they do. The percentages are ridiculous. In any other industry, this would be it wouldn't be tolerated, so to speak. You're like, I'm not buying my product from this company anymore. They are outrageous on their price, right? So you go and you find someone else. Well, there is no one else. There's only one Disney. So if you want their product, you pay what they ask, right?
Yeah.
And I realized that in order for us to be able to do the crazy things we want to do, we have to play Disney.
Mm.
That's the bread and butter, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then that brings in the crowds, but then we give 70% of it right back to Disney. I thought, well, how are we going to make money? We have to be a place that people come for food.
Mm.
So I always say we are a outdoor restaurant that shows movies. and from a business perspective, that I think that still holds true in my head, that if you bring in 500 people on a good Saturday night, and they all buy food because your food is good, it's reasonably priced, and it's interesting. It's different, right? Mm-hmm. It's not your typical, well, we got a hamburger and we got a hot dog and we got a pizza. What do you want?
Right.
So, it's not that. And so I realized we had to do this. And I do believe if we had not done this with the food, we wouldn't be there now.
What's the most shocking?
As I say, my favorite moment is because I kind of pop in and out, right? I just there briefly and then I'm gone and there and gone. But as I come in, Joe's there 24/7, right? He lives there. And every time I come in, I'll come in through the back, through the kitchen or something. The thing that I like the best is it's the same look all the time from the patrons. They come into concession and we have these, TV screens where the menus are. And it's that same 10 minutes looking up, just everyone. And you just silence. Everybody just kind of staring up there where do I, and just everybody doing it, it's like in a movie. They're just all staring at the screen going, oh, wow, okay, I gotta, and just everybody just kind of dumbfounded looking around. It always that same kind of look when I go in there, when they see the menu and just this, what do I get? There's 10 varieties of tenderloin. I think I want this, and then they feel like, hey, I want to go back. I can have something else or something different or whatever. So the options are there, and it's just, it plays well. The concessions are key.
Do you theme the food?
Oh, yes, definitely, definitely. That's one of the most fun things about it, I think, is between the theming of now, we're now to the point where we have some of our themed things have now become so popular that they're just available every night, right? Whereas we would have the, something like the pretzel loin that would only be available during Super Monster Movie Fest.
Okay, you can't just name pretzel loin and move on. What the fuck is a pretzel loin?
Right. So it's an Indiana style breaded tenderloin, deep fried, and sandwiched between two fresh baked soft pretzels.
Yep.
It is obnoxious. It tastes good, but it's obnoxious. And it was, to be completely honest, and no joking here, it was really done as this is pretty funny. We should put this on the menu. Wonder if anybody will buy it. Well, it turned out, of course, it is good. And the reality is, I think a lot of people split it. It's so huge.
Oh my God.
They split it, but between the themes and the idea that, to keep the menu evolving. So many times we'll take things because you don't want the menu to be 100 items, you got to keep it reasonable. We would just dump things off and not for any particular reason, but just to go, let's change it up. Let's do these now. We're not going to serve mozzarella sticks like every restaurant in the entire world that serves. We're going to do cheese curds, fried cheese curds. And so we just literally dump things off the menu to keep it constantly changing. So if you come in, in this year, you come next year, you're going to see probably 15 or 20% different menu every year. That's how we do it.
So you have the Monster Movie Fest is coming up. It's The Devil Made Us Do It. Is it a secret? What is the themed food, or can we talk about it on here?
Okay, so we can.
Don't have to.
We've got a couple special items that are I can mention. One is the Linda Blair, which is a essentially a milkshake, but instead of using milk, we use Green River soda, and it's blended into a beautifully obnoxious green color, and served with a side of communion wafers. I made that last part up. And then we have the breadsticks that are in the shape of a pentagram. Nice. So yeah, the more ridiculous, the better. But the Linda Blair's going to be my favorite this year. So
yeah.
And the Sammy Terry loin will be returning.
Oh, that's awesome.
I don't know if you saw that online or not. It's basically a pizza burger except with a tenderloin.
Yeah.
So
it's funny you mentioned that too, because it's important to note that where we started off with horror hosts, one of the things that helped make Super Monster Movie Fest successful was actually roping in Sammy Terry into the event, being an integral part of the event, which we did pretty early on, really. And then it just, again, organically grew to just, Sammy Terry just shows up now. He's always there. He's
That's
there
awesome.
every year. So, and now,
a lot of people think it's his event.
Yeah.
Now they think it's hey, is Sammy doing the Monster Fest again this year? So, and that's fine that people associate that, because as long as they keep enjoying him being there, I'm sure he'll continue to be there.
So we're talking about the Super Monster Movie Fest, and this one is Devil Demonic Possession. Full disclosure, those are the ones that scare me. That's just the way that I am. That of all the things that are out there, the demonic possession movies get me. But you've done so many different themes. What made you want to do Dusk-To-Dawn for 2 nights? I mean, that's something I've never seen before, and have it themed. You've got 10 movies that you have to theme together.
Right. So the Monster Fest is completely what I would say. So the Super Monster Movie Fest was the first one of these. Now we do several others during the year, of course. It was the one that it started out with no theme. The first couple of years, I think, at least the first 2 years, there was no theme. It was whatever movies I could afford to play. That was the theme. And then we started putting themes to them. And the idea of a 2-night Dusk Till Dawn, what I was really going for was kind of like, the popularity of these horror conventions, to where you can buy a weekend pass. There's vendors, there's, special guests, there's all this. I think that was probably because at that time that was those conventions were really on the rise. This would have been 2011 and 12. And they were getting very big. And I thought, well, what if we have vendors and we get some sort of guest or a host, and then we allow people to camp, which no one around here was doing, by the way, then.
Right.
And I thought, so if the longer people stay, the more food they will buy.
Right.
So we serve breakfast. So you can have breakfast while you're watching, Satan's Cheerleaders. You can have biscuits and gravy and watch Satan's Cheerleaders.
Legs and eggs.
Yeah. So part of it was the economics of it, but the other part was I like doing things that are ridiculously big, meaning brain overload, right? So there are people that are there for 2 days. They sleep very little.
Right. Yeah.
But it's almost like a religious thing to them. Right? Like, okay, if I have to sleep, I'm going to sleep during this movie because it's my least favorite.
Right.
But I may not sleep. I may not sleep until the sun comes up, and then I'm going to sleep in my tent.
Right.
Right. That's right here. and the themes seem to, I have my favorite themes we've done in the past. This year's theme, I think, may be potentially the most dark and scary of all the themes, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's potentially the least kid-friendly theme we've ever done. And we don't try to when we do these, we don't ever the criteria that is not on our list when we do these is, well, we don't want to offend anyone.
Right.
We don't really care about that. So, when we did the Don't Go in the Water, that was that may be my favorite of all, just because of the idea of, we had kiddie pools with bloody sharks floating in them. And, there was, we did Don't Go in the House with the classic haunted house movies.
Mm-hmm.
Why we had never done a devil theme. It's kind of one of those things. Matt was like, what we should do. I'm like, why have we not done that? I mean, that almost seems like one that you would, some of the greatest horror movies or of all time are demonic or related somehow to the devil, yet we had never touched on it.
Right.
We just went, oh, that's a great idea. We should do that. So yeah, I mean, it's when we toil over this every year, sometimes for months, of coming up with the theme and the right films that fit the theme and a flow, right? It's got a flow from first movie to last movie. It's got a flow.
Like an album.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and of course we always tend to put the schlockier things at the end.
Right. When you're punch drunk.
Right. And then it just doesn't care. It's just, oh, this is Satan's Cheerleaders. It's great.
Yeah. Oh, it's so much fun. I love that movie.
I do too.
It's so ridiculous, but I love it. So
I remember when we did the haunted house theme, our last movie, I think on the Saturday, was Hillbillies in a Haunted House.
Oh God, yes.
We had a 35 print of that, actually. So,
wow, that's pretty sacred right there. But I love that you folks like to consider yourselves rebellious in that way. I mean, barnstorming is really what it's all about. All the way from the 40 Thieves refusing to be able to show their movies in Lowe's cinemas, so they went out to the edge of town with a tent and showed their movies, to what's happening today. There's always this thing where we need to find that spot, kind of like what you talked about with the horror host. There's this whole idea of filling a void. What's also interesting about drive-ins and like the horror host thing is that there's a second generation of horror hosts, and they're existing in a time when the necessity isn't there anymore. We're not, we have 24/7 streaming, and yet they still survive. And I think the same thing's happening with the drive-in. You have people coming who don't remember the necessity times of a drive-in, that it's still like this interesting ritual that people feel connected to, even if they don't have the nostalgia themselves. So out of all the things that make the drive-in a unique and special event, Matt and Joe, what's your favorite thing about the Skyline? What's the moment that when it happens, you're like, I'm home?
Wow.
Go
ahead, Matt.
Let Joe go first. No, go ahead.
I was going to say mine is probably a little more abstract, but it's the moment that gives me, makes the hair stand up on my arm. Mm-hmm. And that is when I walk out of the projection booth and the audience is so intently focused, meaning that could be something like applause at the end of a movie. Mm-hmm. If you got 200 cars of people, applause is quite a thing to hear at a drive-in. And also when we play something, I'll give you a quick example that will back this up. We did an event earlier this year that was silent horror films.
Yes. Yeah.
And we had a live organist set up by the projection booth outside playing photo playing this thing. That was as close to amazing as any of my experiences, in that sadly a lot of people don't care. They don't care about silent films anymore.
Right.
But yet here we were able to bring in 200 cars to a silent movie at a drive-in. Right. I mean, that's crazy. So when you feel that, and when he played the organ and the audience had applause at the end of the movie, not just for the movie, but for him, I go, oh, this is wacky, man. This is what this is all about. This is cool. This is why I do it. So yeah, that's me.
For me, I like when the machine, so to speak, just starts going, meaning you're walking around. Joe and I are walking around all the time, right? And when Sammy Terry, does his thing to begin the show, he does a little bit of his show, and the first movie goes, and the people are at the vendors, tents looking at stuff, and the concessions is full, and everybody's running around, and the movie's playing. Everything's moving, everything's going, the night's on. That's what always sticks with me the most, is just, gosh, when it all starts running. And and then, like I said, you walk around and there's the movie and people are talking and people are eating, and there's Sammy Terry still in the back, doing his laugh and meeting and taking pictures, and everything is just all happening, and it goes all night long and then repeats itself again. I just love that first, whoosh of the machine starting up, and just, wow, there it goes.
I would agree with that too.
Yeah. The ritual begins. Mm-hmm. And folks that are listening, that is what I'm talking about. That is passion. We just got to hear why we do the crazy things that we do. And so with that, I do want to say, Joe Gaudin, Matt Masters, thanks so much for being on the show. Where can people go to find out more about what's happening at the Skyline?
Social media, of course, our Facebook page, the Skyline Drive-in, Shelbyville, Indiana, or theskylinedrivein.com are probably the two best places.
Okay. And any upcoming shows that you want to promote?
We have so many things. I'm pushing the Super Monster Movie Fest because we're now in our 10th year. It's the 10th anniversary show. And then our Pandemonium Picture Show weekend for those that like exploitation. And then our partnership with Terror in the Isles out of Chicago for the Drive-In Massacre, which is October 8th and 9th, when we've that's shaping up to be a very cool show that horror fans probably won't want to miss.
There you have it, folks. Anybody who has some frequent flyer miles after that COVID stuff, you know where to go. And I want to thank everybody for listening to Hellbent for Horror, where I'm still here to remind you that you used to love horror films and you secretly still do. And just remember to stay hellbent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Hellbent for Horror, and my Twitter handle is Hellbent Horror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.